Paralympian, a director. I'm also a disabled woman. I wear a prosthetic arm and leg on the left side, and I have done so all my life. So this topic today of universal design is incredibly personal for me. We have two fantastic speakers. We have Sinéad Burke, who is an educator, an advocate, and a contributing editor to British Vogue. We also have Caroline Baumann, who is Swiss-American, and is a director of the Cooper-Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Both of them will be talking to you today about the importance of inclusion and diversity in the design process. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Sinéad onto the stage to begin her talk.
Good morning. It's such an honor to be here and to be speaking to so many people who can create change instantaneously, particularly around the domains that I'm going to be speaking about today, education and fashion. I was 4 years old when I decided that I wanted to be a primary school teacher. For anybody American in the room, an elementary school teacher. When I came home from my first day of school and told my parents that this is what I wanted to do, they were incredibly supportive. Their immediate response was, yes, amazing, absolutely. I went to my second day of school full of encouragement and could visualize myself at the top of the room being a teacher, despite the teacher not looking like me. As an adult reflecting back on those first days of school, I'm incredibly admirable of my parents' complete sense of confidence in what I could be and become. Because that happened in 1994. And Ireland, the country in which I live, ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities in 2018. And it wasn't until I was attending university that I realized that ambition that I had, that I shared with my parents, may be challenged, not by my own abilities, but by design and the world around me. I remember sitting in a lecture, and a colleague, someone who was also studying education, turning to me and saying, "How are you going to do it?" And I said, "What? The assignment? It'll take you 15 minutes. Hand it in, you'll be fine." She said, "No. How are you going to be a teacher? How are you going to control them? How are you going to work within the design of the classroom? It's not for you." And really, it wasn't until that moment that I realized it may not be possible. If you can take yourself back to reflect on your own time in the classroom, can you imagine my challenges? Well, I can't reach the blackboard. The light switch is a challenge. Hanging the artwork on the wall is incredibly difficult, which, if you remember from your childhood, is incredibly important. But my biggest difficulty was much more immediate than that. It's also a challenge in this space. It's the designing of the seating. I could not see every child in my classroom, nor could every child in my classroom see me. So what did I do? I broke from tradition, and they didn't sit in clusters or groups, but they sat in a U shape where they could see one another and see me. But what happens when you step outside the conforms of design? Transformation. Because all of a sudden, the culture and dynamic in my classroom was entirely different. No longer was I the authoritative adult at the top of the room with this assumption that education was almost Foucaultian, that they were pails that I had to fill with knowledge. It became about power sharing. Because all of a sudden, with this design of the classroom, we were all at eye level. And that was something that my colleagues who were training to be teachers couldn't replicate, because what everybody saw as my disadvantage became my enormous advantage despite the challenges of design. And it was within education that taught me the limits of not only who's designing product, but who's designing curriculum and who's designing culture. Teaching in what was known as socioeconomic disadvantaged areas, I realized the limitations of designing of curriculum. Because when I was told to teach about homes, I would teach about cottages with thatched roofs. I would teach about bungalows. I would teach about terrace. The books that I was instructed to work from never spoke about homelessness. which was a reality for so many in my classroom. And yet, I realized very quickly that if we are only designing for an experience which we are familiar with, what are the blind spots? Who are we leaving out? And I had a very wonderful, transformative, personal discovery in exactly this. One of the most challenging subjects to teach in my classroom was mathematics. The boys and girls who I taught didn't feel like it was a subject that they could easily interact with, primarily because the language was inaccessible to them. So I taught maths through the local takeout menu and told them the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which as a disabled woman with dwarfism, they were unsure as to where I was taking that narrative. But I told them that Snow White and Prince Charming had left to go on a last-minute date, and we had €60 by which we had to calculate and work out all of the different menu requirements from the Seven Dwarfs. One was paleo, one was vegan, because it's January, 3 were vegetarian, complicating the arithmetic for those who were independently able, whilst it gave me an opportunity to sit with those who were really challenged by the material. And I learned one very important thing. I said, okay, well, let's just work out the chips. And one boy who really struggled academically said to me, okay, great. Well, 1 bag of chips is €2.50, 2 bags of chips is €5. And if anybody is a teacher or a parent in the room, that moment when a child understands multiplication, it's just sensational. And I wrote down the multiplication, and he looked at me like I was bananas. And he said, what are you doing? I said, that's what you just did. You just did multiplication, you did maths. And he said, I didn't do maths. I did dinner. And we as adults in this room and very privileged space can laugh at that. But he was being entirely sincere, because he did not see the relevance of his reality mirrored in any way the design of the curriculum or the design of the classroom. So how could he see it as an opportunity in which he could be a success? And in many ways, the education system taught me that design wasn't just unique in terms of its challenges and limitations of me as a disabled woman, but it framed my thinking when it came to not only teaching, but also fashion. I stand at the height of 3'5" tall, and am completely enamored by the power of fashion. It is the one industry in which we each have to legally interact with. We all must wear clothes. And yet, as a disabled woman, I felt completely lost within the landscape. I would go shopping with my siblings or with my friends, and as you can see from this image alone, could not reach so many of the items that exist. I was never considered within the design process, be it at the rails, in the changing room, at the height of the cash register. But it is not just within the retail space and design alone that I'm not considered, but in the entire ecosystem in fashion. I love clothes. But at 3'5" tall, if you pass me in the corridors of the Congress Center, you may mistake me for a child. However, today, I'm wearing full-length custom Gucci. It is unlikely you will mistake me for a child. And that is the power of fashion. But what does the fashion industry need to do to change? Because in many ways, the system is enormous and it seems very difficult to transform. Do we need models and lines that are just designed specifically for disabled people? I really don't feel that's a long-term solution. What I need on a very individual basis is something most of us in this room need: alterations. As you can see, this coat doesn't entirely fit. But what about if we start to deconstruct it? Literally. What about if we take some more off? And for good effect, add a crown. Now, this is not a coat that I can wear every day. These are beautiful images by the incredible fashion photographer Tim Walker for the print issue of The Business of Fashion. But the ecosystem of the fashion industry is taking steps forward, but it needs to change at every level. We need to be encouraging design students that there is not just one body type that is a good body or is the right body in which needs to be designed for. How can we encourage creativity and curiosity among design students? How do we make sure that disabled people feel that fashion is not just an industry that they can participate in as consumers, but also as employees? As a disabled woman, I like to describe myself as organized, creative, curious, and articulate. Those are 4 skills that I developed not just out of personal interest, but for survival. From the earliest of age, I've been having to manipulate architecture and design in order for my independence. For just a second, think within this space alone how I would have to mitigate that. Perhaps it's in the design of public restrooms, and I cannot reach the lock on the cubicle door. So over the course of the next few days, you may see me approaching you and asking you for assistance or for help. But what's the broader lens? So not only do we need to look at design students, but this community has a size of 1 billion people. It's the size of China. And in terms of their spending, it's just over $2 trillion. But we need to do this sincerely and beautifully. We need to develop scholarship programs so that those who are disabled can enter into these spaces and participate in design colleges. We need to make sure that HR and employment practices are rid of any biases that might exist. If a CV comes across your desk and someone says that they were unwell for a period of time, or there was a time missing within their CV, it's not good enough just to discredit them. We need to also make sure that designers are bringing disabled people into the conversation because they will have ideas about the future of design that is formed by their lived experience. Take this dress, for example. My condition of achondroplasia means that I have a curvature in my spine, which means that all garments that have to go around my hip measurement lift. So whenever I'm liaising with a designer, be it Gucci or another brand, I ask them very specifically, will you please introduce 2 inches longer the hemline at the rear so that it will look odd on a hanger, but even on me? For so many brands, this is a new innovation. But how many consumers have a wider hip measurement than they do waist measurement? This is the beauty of bringing in this diversity of voices and removing the blind spot that we have within the system of design. But is the fashion industry changing? Earlier this year, I was very fortunate to receive the Leadership Award at the Green Carpet Fashion Awards in Milan, and this is on stage at La Scala. But in order to take steps forward, this conversation is not going to change tomorrow or the next day. Brands have to invest in this as a long-term change, because one of the greatest challenges that has been for the advancement of this conversation is that disabled voices have just not been included. But what do we need? We need platforms, not pedestals. We need the design communities, be it in architecture, fashion, education, and society as a whole, to open up the privileged spaces and to welcome the diversity of voices that exists within our society to be included in the conversation. We need to value their contributions, their lived experience, and continuously ask the question, who is not in the room? And what I would ask you in the audience is, who is not in the room? I'm very grateful to all of you who have taken this moment this morning, so early within the very first day of the Davos schedule. But I would ask you, from whatever you learn from this session, to be empowered to be an advocate and an ally, and have this discussion as you meander through the corridors and meet people who can create change tomorrow, if not the next day. I need you to ask who is not in this room, and who is not in the rooms as you go back to wherever you work and exist. Because the only way in which change can happen is if we all do this together. Thank you very much.
Wow, I mean, that was unbelievable. Thank you so much, Sinéad, for sharing your personal insights into the fashion industry, into education and your journey. It's groundbreaking. Thank you. Can I now invite Caroline Baumann onto the stage to give her talk?
Good morning. The first beta zone is about designing for all. I find that quite thrilling. Thank you for being here. It is delightful to be representing the Smithsonian. We're here for the 3rd year here in Davos, and it is my privilege to represent the museum where I am director, the Cooper-Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Some of you are nodding, that's great. As you may know, we're located right on Museum Mile on 91st and 5th Avenue. And our purpose is to inspire, educate, and empower people through design. What's really exciting us is who's coming to Cooper-Hewitt. Our demographic is the millennial audience. And what does that mean? That means that our content is reverberating for the younger generation. And why is that important? Because the younger generation are our future leaders and our future designers. Sinéad, you were just incredible. Thank you so much. And all of you should know that Sinéad was one of our earliest inspirations at Cooper-Hewitt for our focus on accessibility and inclusive thinking and working. Design is all about empathy and keeping the user at the center of the design process. So when the germ of an idea for a design product is there, the user is brought in, but not just at that moment, at every stage of development of the design product. I'm here today to really share with you just how powerful design can be, intangibly and effectively improving how the world works. So, to tell you a little bit about myself, my passion for design began very early. We moved from Paris to a suburb north of Boston when I was very small, and my Swiss father, who was a professor of engineering, transformed our basement into a laboratory of creativity and experimentation. So any given afternoon, there would be telescopes in the making, and we had a dark room where we developed film. There were oscilloscopes in the basement, as well as red lasers bouncing off prisms and strobes. It was really something. But my favorite thing was setting type on my grandfather's printing press. So yes, I did have business cards when I was 5. Not exactly useful, but quite an inspiration for my love for design. Years later, the importance of design really hit home for me at Bates College, where one of my peers, Eric Kondo, was injured in a very serious motorcycle accident that left him paralyzed from the mid-chest down. Now, Eric was and is a keen athlete, and he was not going to let this accident or his being in a wheelchair restrict him. So he began adapting his wheelchair into a completely different type of mobility piece of equipment. So many of us like to hoverboard and skateboard. So does Eric. Being in a wheelchair doesn't restrict him, right? So he is enjoying that freedom of movement while gaining a sense of balance, coordination, and confidence. Eric uses a quote, uses a phrase that really resonates in my mind, which is, "We are the pilots, not the passengers." We are the pilots, not the passengers, when he's describing the relationship between himself and his equipment or the wheelchair. Equal access is a human rights issue, right? Sinead mentioned there are 1 billion people in the world with a disability. Diversity is humanity's greatest asset, but inclusion is our greatest challenge. So I'm happy and proud to say that at Cooper-Hewitt, inclusivity is part of our core. And our exhibitions are embedded with accessibility, as are our education programs. So some of these images are showing you our high school students who are learning empathy. So we give them design tools like suits, age suits, as well as glasses that simulate poor vision so they can empathize with their elders around them. We also invite design thinkers that focus on designing for disability to Cooper-Hewitt on a very regular basis. Here at a recent symposium, you see Kat Holmes on the right-hand side of the image. Kat Holmes is Director of User Experience at Google and the author of this wildly popular book entitled Mismatch. This book has been a great inspiration to me, and what really is important here is the title, because it's so apt. Mismatched human interactions is where the problem lies. That is where the problem lies, because when something is not being designed for the user, it's excluding that user. So Kat talks a lot about inclusion and exclusion. To give you a few simple examples, the ice cream scoop. So you're trying to get the chocolate chip ice cream out of the gallon container, but you're left-handed, and it's not made for a left-hander. Or you're at the grocery, and at the digital checkout, it's all in English. You don't speak English. The type's too small. You don't have 20/20 vision. There are all these things where people are not thinking about the end user. So at Cooper-Hewitt, we're a team of about 90 people, and we're working together and with communities representing several different disabilities so that we can learn from them, but also integrate people into the Cooper-Hewitt experience from the very start. I was really excited the other day when someone in our design shop waved me down and said, "Caroline, come here, come here." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I just learned universal sign language so I can communicate with our deaf visitors." Now, I hope that you've seen our marvelous exhibition, Access Plus Ability, which is right outside this room. And if you haven't, this is my invitation to jump into the exhibition after the beta zone. What you'll see right at the entrance is this terrific accessible icon. So the designer, Sarah Hendren, and her friend and professor of philosophy, Matthew, his name will come to me, my apologies, worked together. And what Sarah always stresses is it was a collaboration from the start. Brian Glennie came back to me. Brian Glennie. So Brian and Sarah worked on this guerrilla street art campaign a couple of years ago, where they would put stickers over the 50-year-old accessible icon. Why? To show that people in wheelchairs are not statically sitting down in their wheelchairs. They're dynamic, they're moving forward, they're making change. So what's exciting about this guerrilla campaign is it's now all over the world. Individuals are using it, governments are using it, companies of all sizes are using it. And it is so important to show that inclusivity must be a core value. It's also an emoji on your phone, by the way. So as you tweet today about our exhibition, you can actually use the emoji. It's part of the public domain. Now let me grab a prop for a second. This is a little big for me, and you may be wondering why I'm holding this, but it fits in perfectly with the theme of this talk. So Matthew Waltzer is a teenager from Florida with cerebral palsy. And his one dream was to have a shoe, a basketball shoe, that would give him the proper support that he needed, where he wouldn't have to tie it, but he would have easy access in and out. So he wrote to Nike and said, you know, LeBron James has this super cool pair of basketball sneakers. I'd love something like that where there's no tying mechanism, so I can go in and out with no problem. And that's exactly what this is with this rear access. His foot can just go in and out. You can try this in the exhibition as well. The point here, though, is Matthew got the shoes thanks to a wonderful partnership with the legendary shoe designer Toby Hatfield, and the stigma was gone. He had the cool shoe like everybody else. So that's a beautiful example of an athletic company working with the community in need and coming up with something that represents design for all. So depending on the year of your births, this playground picture may bring back memories or not. But my point here is many playgrounds are not accessible, and oftentimes they're even downright dangerous, right? So in Palo Alto, there was a mother of a child on the autism scale who was experiencing exclusion everywhere they went. And she had the idea to create a magical playground, and that's exactly what she did. So there are slides called dignity slides. So some children have trouble dismounting at the bottom of the slide. They simply move to the left or the right, and the child behind them can slide down. There are also hideaway huts. So many people on the autism spectrum would find the frenetic atmosphere of the playground just too much, but they can go into a hideaway hut. All of these experiences were built and designed in collaboration with the children. This was an inclusive design project. I want to share a video with you of the magical harp. So we have brought the Chandelier Harp with us to Davos for all of you to enjoy today. And what's so meaningful about the harp is, and the entire playground, it is a joyful incubator for a more tolerant society, right? Where people with disabilities, people without disabilities can come together and enjoy being outside, enjoy playing together, and in respecting one another. So I'm going to take a little shift after sharing these 3 great examples of design and disability to point out how design can make such change in the arenas, the themes that we so often discuss here at WEF, from poverty to equal access to water access. So starting with user-centered design in Rwanda, enter zipline. So Rwanda, mountainous terrain, frequent rains that just completely flood the streets, result in blood and vaccines not getting to the hospitals in time. So Zipline, which is an automated logistics company in California, came up with this drone, which is the fastest commercial drone delivery system in the world. And they've done nearly 5,000 trips just in Rwanda alone. It's going so well that it'll be expanding across Africa and even to the United States in the coming year. And what's so important here is the doctors and their teams can text the team at Zipline, and they quickly prepare the blood or the medicine. It gets into the Zipline, and it goes straight to that hospital, making a difference and saving lives. In South Africa, it is often the women and the children who fetch the potable water, and they'll walk for kilometers and kilometers to find that water, and then often bring it back in ways that are uncomfortable, perhaps with the water on their heads, resulting in all sorts of neck and spinal injury. Enter Q-Drum. It's durable, it's cheap, It's fast. Women can roll it with ease, as can children. So what does that mean? That means more time and freedom for the women and children to make a difference in their communities and learn. Lastly, the Warka water tower in Ethiopia. The Warka water tower is named for the Warka tree, which is an endangered fig tree in Ethiopia where community members come together because the tree provides prodigious shade. Now, this tower weighs about 75 kilograms, and it's 15 meters high. It's made out of hemp rope, polyester, very easy to construct, and the beautiful thing about this tower is it's harvesting water in a sustainable way. What kind of water? It is collecting fog, water from fog and mist and dew and rain. And you might think, oh, well, they get, a cup a day. Not at all. We're seeing massive amounts of water every day collected from the Warka water tower. And the architect has given all of the plans to the world. So it is open source, and he's also leading trainings so that communities nearby can also have a water tower. So, in conclusion, inclusive design to advance human experience is really focused on one thing, and that is we need to better understand the human experience together, right? Going forward, it is not enough to design for some people or most people. We need to design for diversity, and we need to do that now. It's a great opportunity to bring in diverse voices into the design process, to learn from what we do not know, and most importantly, to come together as a community and expand those people who believe in inclusion. So today, we ask you, join the circle. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening to that. Thank you, Caroline, for that very insightful talk around Cooper-Hewitt and what you do there. I wanted to, I guess, kick off the conversation by really asking you about the importance of that collaboration between people with disabilities, people without disabilities working together, young people. How can we engage more people to get involved in that way? Question to you both.
I'll jump in on that one, if I may.
Please.
We have learned so much by involving the communities that we want to serve. Two quick examples. We just assumed that having all of our labels in Braille was the solution for people with low vision or the blind. And then we started doing focus groups, asking this community what would be most useful for you in understanding the design objects. And they really responded audio, audio, audio. So we're taking that in stride, and the entire staff is now learning how to write and use the right words to describe design objects, both for the in-gallery experience and the online experience. My other specific example is we do this terrific event that I love that's called the Teen Design Fair during National Design Week. It's like speed dating, basically, and we bring in 500 teenagers, and they're in front of fashion designers, interior designers, landscape designers. We encourage them to ask anything they want. this year, for the first year, we brought in groups of kids with disabilities. And one of the girls on the autism scale wants to become a designer, and we're already mentoring her and getting her more involved. So it's that inclusion and explaining to the other children that they need to mix and understand how everybody lives and what challenges other communities may have.
And Sinead, you did talk to me earlier about, the importance of language and identity and disability. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. Just to follow on from your point, Caroline, I think that notion of collaboration is absolutely essential for the future of both design and society. And I think it's about creating this almost symbiotic relationship where both parties feel comfortable being confident in expressing their needs, but also vulnerable in expressing their ignorance or their lack of awareness. Working within the design industry, and particularly in fashion, the one statement I'm coming across more and more is, I've never thought about that before. Exactly. And in many ways, that's because within these spaces, people have been afforded a luxury or a privilege or just a lifestyle experience where they have never had to. And it is about those in very privileged positions being very aware and open and being very comfortable in their discomfort of not knowing everything. Because I think fashion and design in particular has come from a position where they are all knowing and being really open to it. And I think it's also about empowering disabled people or any minority voice or any person who has an idea, who has an experience that they want to push forward, to challenge the communities or the industries or the companies or the institutions that can make this change a reality. And in my mantra is oftentimes, what's the worst that can happen? But the piece you said about identity is so important. And I think within this dialogue and within this relationship, it's incredibly important to validate anybody who is coming to you, not just with a lived experience, but with an expertise. This person isn't merely just kind of volunteering so that the world can have a better place. The knowledge that they have has such transformative value. And I think it's really important as we move forward that not only do we root all of this work in empathy, but we make sure that the humanity maintains too. I think in design spaces often when we talk about teaching awareness and teaching disability awareness, often the approach can be to dress up disability, that if you would like to understand what it is like to have my lived experience, that you will contort yourself to be my height for 6 hours. That is not going to give you a realistic insight into my world. If you would like one, meet me for a cup of coffee. Let's organize a meeting and we can structure some design framework as we move that forward. And I think we need to be really careful that empathy is also about really highlighting and embodying the experience of the individual disabled person. And the final piece about identity, just to move forward, is the importance of language. Within disabled communities, there is a spectrum of both needs and language. Lots of disabled people prefer to use disability and identity first language. I would say that I am a disabled person. Some people prefer person with a disability, and then there is other terminology that exists, special needs, differently abled. My ask for you is to incite a curiosity and to be aware that you may not know what the language is, but don't allow that to breathe apathy and frustration. Be brave in your curiosity and say, I'm really unsure what the correct vocabulary is. Can you provide it with me? And people like me are so familiar with explicating their vulnerabilities in person that they'll really open up an invitation to offer that to you.
And to your point, Sinead, I was going to add that, as a disabled person myself, I own that identity. I'm happy, I'm comfortable to talk about it. I don't get offended easily. And I think very often people are uncomfortable about asking questions. They're worried about using the right language, but ultimately it's about asking those questions that will lead to solutions, that will lead to a better understanding and more cohesion within society.
Any sort of interaction is going to bring about education within the fashion space. When the limitations of design exist, often what can transform that is people. So I showed photographs earlier of me within a retail space. It would be idealistic to reimagine the entire retail space designed for me. It would not fit any of you. And it's about finding that median in between. But what will transform my experience is that if I walk into a store and a sales assistant comes up to me and says, "Hi, my name is Sinead. Really great to have you in store today. I understand that this space may not be accessible to you, but what can I do to help?" And I'm like, can you see those gold shoes? I'll have them in 3 pairs, please. And all of a sudden, I will leave the store. either making a purchase or the limitations of design will not be what it was.
Absolutely.
Something I'd love to add to your comment, Sinead, is it is a work in progress, right? I mean, that's something we always say at Cooper-Hewitt and within the Smithsonian. We are adding various tools to the toolkit, but we're learning every day because we're bringing the communities in to learn from. And that's something that, you know, I often say to leaders who haven't yet dipped their toes into this pool. It's so important to just go for it, learn, and get the culture started in your organization.
And that's a good example of best practice, really. Just before we open up to the audience, I have one very quick question for Sinead around the fashion industry. I mean, it's not necessarily viewed overly inclusive all the time. I remember growing up in the 90s, seeing nobody like myself in the media and out there. And I remember seeing Amy Mullins walking the catwalk with 2 wooden hand-carved legs for Alexander McQueen in '99, and they were actually prosthetic legs, and everyone thought that they were boots. And I was just shocked and amazed that this person who was, was representing a different kind of a human body. How do you think the conversation has moved forward, between then and now? I mean, is there more to be done? You did elaborate, but I just wanted you to touch upon that further.
There's a huge amount to be done. And I think I was very conscious when I first began to insert myself in the fashion industry that if this industry could take the lead, every other industry would follow. It has this influential potential and power. So you mentioned Amy Mullins, who walked for Alexander McQueen. Within the US and the United Kingdom, we are seeing more and more disabled models who exist. So we have Gillian Mercado in IMG, we have Mama Cax, we have Aaron Phillips, who's a transgender model and is also a wheelchair user and gaining more and more prominence. We have Kelly Knox in the UK. But I think we need to go beyond having merely disabled models on the catwalk. That visibility, as you said, as a disabled person, is so important, but we need systemic change. So I'm working with large luxury brands to really transform both their internal and external culture in terms of who they hire, how they hire, in terms of how they market products and how they tell those stories, always making sure it's devoid of inspiration porn or utilizing disabled people merely to provide a currency, and then making sure that the products that they design, as you were saying earlier, we're not, by designing for the one, it has multiple implications. I'm always fascinated by the design of a dress, that a woman in this era, or if a person who is not a woman chooses to buy a dress, and they go in, they buy the dress with their own money, and then they come home, and they can neither get in nor out of it independently due to the zip being at the back. I won't embarrass anybody, but I'm sure more than one of us in the audience has slept in a dress because we couldn't get out of it. Lots of the men are looking confused. I promise it happens. But that is because the dress was designed in an era in which women were definitely in a relationship or with a partner and somebody who could undo that for them, or they had paid help. And my question is, we are living in an entirely different social era. Why has this design remained? Why is it still a zip? Why are we not using beautiful Velcro or magnets or something that's not just sustainable but also accessible?
Yeah, buttons can be tricky with one hand, I know that for sure. Yeah. Okay, I just want to, in our final few moments, open up to the audience with anybody who has any burning questions they want to ask either panelists or any of us.
Susie, I have a question for you, actually.
Oh.
Getting to know you a bit over the last few days, a wonderful example of a deep understanding of disability is your medal. Could you share that with this audience, please?
So Caroline and I spoke about this yesterday, and actually I didn't let you know, Sinead, but the Paralympic medals in Rio actually are an example of assistive or accessible design because, as I demonstrate here, for anybody who has a visual impairment, if you shake it, it makes a sound so that someone with a visual impairment can hear which colour of a medal that they have, and they all have different colours. So that is an example of a design that is inclusive and just so happens to be a medal as well. So we'll put that one back away. But just opening it up.
Around your neck.
Gold medal.
Put it around the neck, yeah. Okay, yeah, we have a question there from that gentleman.
So, within design, so I'm from the design field myself, within design there's always been kind of normative aspects, so even some of the challenges that we see here in Davos, for instance, proliferation of plastic or cars, came from a good spot. So cars came when we were walking around in horseshit in cities, plastic came when we needed to get rid of the use of ivory. So there's always been this designing for good, and this is of course a new take on designing for good, the inclusiveness. But do you also look for those boundaries? When does this kind of design understanding end this debate over our playgrounds for kids have now become so safe that they almost cannot hurt themselves. And and risk-taking is part of creating a good life.
Would you like to?
Well, the magical playground is an example for me of what all playgrounds should strive for. I have a 4-year-old, and I was in the playground about a week ago, and there was a boy in a wheelchair, and kids can be mean, right? And a kid came up to him and said, "What are you going to do here?" And I just wanted to shake the other little boy because, we've got to make these places accessible. There's always safety issues, and we're going in the right direction as far as safety or danger. So we're focusing more on making it joyful space for everyone, really.
Yes, Sinead.
If I could just follow in.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the conversation that we are culturally having about the notion of political correctness and this idea that we're moving too much towards a safer space, be it with language or with design of playgrounds. And I think that particularly with the notion of political correctness or even safety in school playgrounds, if we are continuously striving to make spaces open and inclusive, and then if people who are vulnerable or marginalized or minority in any way are telling you that this is what we need, this is what we would like, the least the majority can do is go, okay,
exactly.
I'll take that on and move forward. And if it does become too safe but inclusive for more people, that's a challenge that I would rather have than see so many of society continue to be ostracized and othered further.
And excluded, yeah.
Yeah, round of applause. Do we have time for one more question? Yeah, one more question. Yeah, that lady there.
Thank you. You gave some very interesting examples about design for people with disabilities. For example, the tennis shoe from Nike. I'm curious if companies are going to design with all audiences in mind, how do they make that financially sustainable? Is there enough demand for these products for companies to actually produce them and make money? Or have you seen experiences where they're subsidized, but one income stream of the company is covering this? Or are there tax breaks for companies that maybe are losing money on a certain line for people with disabilities, that they can write it off? How can this be scaled? How can companies scale this, adopt this, if they can't make money on it, or at least cover their costs in providing these products and services?
I'm going to take that one from a fashion perspective. So Tommy Hilfiger, an American brand, has an adaptive line that has been in existence for between 3 to 4 years as of now. And up until this point, it has proved very financially viable for that company. And it is about looking at kind of where that customer base can go. So it's not just targeting it for the disabled consumer. So how in which they have changed the products for that line is both in terms of fabrics. So if you are on the autism spectrum, you may have sensitivity to particular fabrics within the skin. And that's not unique to people with autism. That could be anybody within this room. And it's about realizing that, again, what we were talking about earlier, when you're designing for the one, it needs to have broad scale impact. And as we were seeing with Nike and with the shoe, that it's not just about creating this for one child with cerebral palsy, but realizing how many of us want shoes and sneakers that we can slip in easy and out of. In this modern era where currency is time and currency, these adaptive fashions can move forward. And I think it's about not just making it specific for people with disabilities and marketing it as such, but making it mainstream. And I think that's the way in which profit margins can really absorb those costs, because it's not just about creating a fabric for one particular line for one consumer, but making sure that it is immortalized throughout the whole collection.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I guess we've run out of time now, so I wish we could talk more about this because I think it's a fascinating topic. And thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Call to action, I guess, for people, for leaders and for people with disabilities to work together to find solutions, because it is possible. It can have a bigger impact beyond just their lives, and truly could change lives and change the world and change markets. So leaving that as a takeaway, thank you to the World Economic Forum for putting this panel on and giving us the opportunity to discuss this. Thank you, Sinead and Caroline. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.